Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everybody.
Tuesday morning, day 2 of the Republican convention. You're not at this one, right, Matt? You're not. You didn't make the trip.
No, I haven't been to one of these in 8 years. I mean, obviously the last conventions were weird because of COVID, but I am happily not at any conventions.
You don't want to be there. You don't want to see the moment of the God save Donald Trump entering the room, divine intervention in front of your eyes.
Yeah, look, I think part of it is just our politics today is so frustrating and discouraging, and part of it though is I just don't think conventions are what they used to be either. So,
Well, no, but these upcoming conventions are going to be a little weird.
yeah.
But let me just ask you, because I just made a very snarky comment. Obviously, Matt, you're a more religious person than I. Just my gut reaction to this whole divine intervention stuff is, one, if I was religious, I would be apoplectic that people were asserting knowledge of God's plan. Two, assuming that God saved Trump and not this poor firefighter who was killed in front of his family. Is there any penalty of any sort? Does anyone in the religious community get upset at these sorts of things, or do you feel like there's reason to believe in miracles because of something like this?
Well, we just had a Republican first night of a Republican convention where a porn star I don't know what Amber Rose exactly, how you would exactly define Amber Rose. I think was she dated or was married to Kanye West or something?
I don't even know who this person is. I saw some references to her on X. I don't even know what's going on there.
And she has apparently like defended Satanists under the guise that they help women get abortions. So my point is that ship has sailed. Just
So
as
she was at the convention.
she spoke at the convention.
Okay.
Just as the Teamsters Union may surprise the National Right to Work Committee, who has spent decades working on the conservative movement, Amber Rose's appearance might surprise social conservatives.
So you're saying the Teamsters Union is the work of the devil? And I just want to make sure I'm understanding you correctly.
I'm just connecting the dots, Bill. Obviously,
they killed Jimmy Hoffa and got away with it.
Yes.
Clearly, the devil's hand is at work here.
Yeah, I'm not saying that, but you know. So anyway, it's not your father's Republican Party. Look, this is I think, was it Churchill said there's nothing so exhilarating as being shot at to no effect. There have been great historical figures who've survived assassination attempts. I'm thinking Ronald Reagan, Pope John Paul II, Margaret Thatcher. I know in the case of Reagan, he felt that that whatever days he had left, he owed to God. We'll put it that way. Obviously, others less great figures. Adolf Hitler survived, not in the well. He did survive an assassination attempt, but I'm thinking instead of him in World War I, coming close to dying, and I think there's a sense that destiny is on your side when you survive one of these close calls. So I'm sure there's a psychological effect to it. I don't think you're going to see anytime soon social conservatives recoil at the idea that this is some divine intervention.
You have not bought into the divine intervention argument.
Look, who knows? I mean, if you want to get into theology, I mean, God controls everything, and we see through a glass darkly, and you know, every breath I take, God gives me. But I don't think it's really appropriate or helpful to believe that it's anything other than luck or whatever. But I will say this much is true, Bill, that an inch, you know, call it luck, but good luck in this case. But you know, if you get shot in the ear, I mean, any little thing, if Trump had moved differently or whatever, it could have been a dramatically different outcome, obviously.
Now, more in my wheelhouse than theology is history, and I was offended at people like Elon Musk and others comparing Trump to showing the strength of Teddy Roosevelt. No president has shown this much strength than Teddy Roosevelt, and even putting aside the fact that we had like genuine military heroes between the two, like George H.W. Bush, Dwight Eisenhower. People, I don't think everybody really knows the full Teddy Roosevelt story. They might know he got shot in the 1912 campaign, and I posted on X about this. But just to talk about it succinctly, he was actually walking into, I believe, the same convention hall that the Republican convention is at right now. He was walking in. He was shot a few feet away in the chest. The bullet, hit his eyeglass case and his speech, so it didn't go in as far into his chest as might have otherwise. But it still went in his chest. He was genuine bullet wound, was bleeding. His team said, "You got to go to the hospital." He said, "No, I'm going to give my speech." This is after directly confronted the shooter and scolded him. Spoke for 75 minutes while throwing down his bullet-holed speech page by page on the stage. And then when he was finished, said, "Okay, now I'll go where you want me to go." I'm not saying Donald Trump should have stayed and given his speech. It's a different time. The Secret Service was doing their job. But to say there's any comparison to the situations beyond the fact that they were both shot at is historically ludicrous.
Well, yeah, and I mean, Trump obviously did not continue his speech, nor should he have. But anyway, this is what they do, Bill. This is what they do. It's God and TR. So anyway, we should probably, and it's crazy how the news cycles work nowadays, Bill. We're just speaking, it's the assassination attempt was Saturday. We are talking Tuesday morning, but it feels like a month ago. There's been so much that happened. And one development, obviously, was Donald Trump has selected J.D. Vance, the senator from Ohio, the hillbilly elegy author, to be his running mate. What do you make of that pick?
Well, just to respond to what your preface, in the first 24 hours, there was the sense of this is all over. There's no way Democrats can come back from this. Donald Trump is going to be such a sympathetic figure that it's going to be a runaway contest. And there's talk from the Republicans. Trump's a changed man. Near death changes a man. Trump told the Washington Examiner, "I threw up my speech. Now it's a time for unity." What are that? And even all the other convention speakers were told to dial it down, not up. And what's happened since then? Trump's appeal to national unity was to beg RFK Jr. for an endorsement in the name of national unity. National unity is to endorse me. That's national unity. He picks the most divisive figure on the list for his VP, J.D. Vance. And what little I could stomach from the convention last night, there was no dialing down at all.
Yeah.
So I think we're back to where we were. Now, look, Democrats certainly have their problems here. I'm not discounting that.
We'll get to that.
But under normal circumstances, I would say Democrats would have a really great shot at taking apart this ticket because J.D. Vance is hardly a safe choice.
Yes. Well, this is not an original thought, but, Vance doesn't really bring much to the ticket in terms of expanding Trump's reach. I mean, it's not an overture to women. There's not a geographical play. I mean, certainly Ohio is not a swing state, but maybe Vance helps in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, the blue wall type thing. But generally speaking, it seems to be the kind of pick you make if you're convinced you're going to win, and if you want to double down on basically the MAGA ideology to the degree that it's coherent. J.D. Vance would seem to be like a governing pick in that regard and a legacy pick. What do you make of that?
I basically agree. It's really rare. It's really rare for a presidential nominee to do a double down VP pick. They're almost always balance choices in some way, whether it's ideological or experience level, geographic. There's almost some sort of vulnerability or weakness you're trying to mitigate with the pick. Not saying that always works, but that's often the strategic thinking. Even someone as safe as a Tim Kaine for Hillary Clinton, well, that's a white Catholic male to balance out the groundbreaking first female and also Methodist choice. Donald Trump in 2016.
Gotta balance those Methodists.
Donald Trump's 2016 pick. He came out of the primary weak with evangelicals. Ted Cruz is winning the evangelical vote in many places. And they want to shore up that part of the base. So Mike Pence helped in that regard and was someone who was seen as having more governing experience. If you were worried about Donald Trump not being a traditional candidate who's worked in elective office before, Pence helped mitigate that to some degree. Joe Biden, an old white guy, picks the first woman of color. Mitt Romney, seen as too moderate. Paul Ryan is devout ideological conservative. Barack Obama's young. Joe Biden was an old elder statesman. I mean, this is the standard way things have gone. Even Dick Cheney, George W. Bush, even though he was a Bush, was seen as, kind of a lightweight, hadn't been in elective office very long, had a very irresponsible younger adulthood. Dick Cheney was going to be the old hand helping steer the ship. That's the way these things generally go. So what's the most famous double down pick? Clinton Gore. Both young Southern moderates. Gore's a little bit of an experience difference in that he was a Washington creature and Clinton was Arkansas. But the main selling point was they were, peas in a pod. But that double down pick was a way to more forcefully break with the reputation of the Democrats as a excessively orthodox liberal party. This is a way to show this is a new party. Give us a fresh look. If you're a swing voter who thought that we were too left to be serious about governing, this is a clear evidence that this is a new game in town. And Trump Vance has a certain element of that because this is not the Romney-Ryan Republican Party. This is a continuation of the transformation of the party away from a more traditional hawkish internationalist foreign policy, economically libertarian party into a Russia-friendly, protectionist, and frankly anti-democratic party. Vance literally said Mike Pence should not have certified the Electoral College vote in 2020. So this is a huge distance from where the party was 12 years ago. But in terms of trying to double down in a way that's appealing to skeptical swing voters, there's none of that here. This is to fully tighten the bond with the MAGA base and signal that even if Trump died tomorrow, this guy is not a spring chicken himself. He is saying, this is not just about getting me elected this year. This is about making sure the party is MAGA-fied for the next generation.
After he was shot, after he said, "Where are my shoes?" his first words when they stood him up were "fight, fight, fight."
Well, and before that, wait. Let's make sure I get the shot of my fist in the air.
Did he say that? Was that?
He said, wait. I heard you hear wait very clearly.
Service or whatever.
I mean, the other part I made up, but the wait he said.
This iconic photo, but the fight, fight, fight thing. is indicative of everything, right? At least, but he fights. That's what they said about him in 2015, 2016. The people who were supporting him in the Republican Party, like on Twitter, and the JD Vance pick is a fighting pick, right? I mean, this is not it's not a kinder, gentler olive branch to Nikki Haley or Marco Rubio or even a Doug Burgum. This is a pick that is MAGA, and the thing is, it might work, right? So like Donald Trump has managed to survive and thrive by kind of going against conventional political wisdom. That conventional political wisdom says, at some point you start, politics is a game of addition, and you start trying to grow your coalition and reaching out to different cohorts and trying to bring them. Like Donald Trump never does that. He's never done that. It's always been fan service. And this is a fan service pick. But the crazy thing is, it's kind of worked for Donald Trump, and maybe it will again.
Well, I don't really agree with that. I mean, he did a balancing type pick in 2016, which made sure he didn't have a bleed from his base.
But that was not. That was within the Republican coalition.
Yeah, I mean, he was trying to mend a fence within the base.
Yeah.
Not, and which just, so it wasn't a swing vote play. I grant you that. Right. And it just barely worked. It just barely worked by an inch in a few states. And every election cycle since then has not gone in Trump's direction. So 2018, 2020, 2022 were all losses to some degree, whether it's losing the House 2018, losing the White House and Senate in 2020, losing a net Senate seat in 2022. Yes, they barely won the House, but hardly enough to, hardly in line with historical projections, and to such a minimal degree that they can barely even govern the place. So I'm not impressed by Trump's general electoral strategies. Could he win this time around? Absolutely. I don't think it's going to be because of JD Vance. It's going to be because the Democrats have totally fallen apart, and they are divided every which way and don't have a guy at the top of the ticket who is convincing people he has the mental acuity to be president. Now, by the same token, as I wrote, I'm sorry, go on, Matt.
Donald Trump was winning this race before that debate. So
by a little bit, but yeah. I would argue that under normal circumstances, an incumbent president who was presiding over an economy where GDP was growing, where unemployment was at a record low, where wages were beating inflation for over a year straight, where no American troops were dying in an unpopular ground war, those incumbents win re-election every time in the past 100 years plus.
Well, I know you've got your 12 keys, and and Joe Biden is in 10 of your 12 keys. He should be winning, but
he should be winning. And the reason why he was being held back was concerns about his age and health. And the whole idea for proposing a June debate was to put that issue to bed so you can get back to the basic fundamentals of the race that obviously has backfired immeasurably. And so you can't be as confident that the fundamentals are going to kick in here. Now, I wrote a piece, and I've written publicly multiple times now, that Biden should not just withdraw but resign. And I think a President Kamala Harris could execute a campaign where the fundamentals are in your favor. Having said that, I wrote a slightly different piece for Monday, because you're seeing some gloom and doom get picked up in the background quotes to the press from Democrats. They should not assume that they're definitely going to lose. It is possible that the polls today won't bear out 4 months from now. It is possible that other developments are going to occur, which might regain some more comfort with either Biden or an alternate nominee. We may be on the cusp of a Israel-Hamas ceasefire. We may be on the cusp of a Federal Reserve rate cut. We're already seeing the border tightened and the illegal crossings going way down. That could well continue. There are things that Biden could run on and say, hey, I might be stumbling through these interviews, but look at the results here. And with this other X factor, which I've written about before, that the GOTV efforts on both sides could be a huge mismatch. I mean, these races are still, again, the polls have widened to some extent in Trump's favor, but Biden hasn't cratered in most polls yet. I'm not saying he couldn't, but it's possible that people's minds are just made up in general, and so there isn't that much wiggle room no matter how much Biden falls apart. And if Trump's GOTV effort is a total ramshackle affair because they handed it to Turning Point and other inexperienced outfits with ideological views that all you have to do to win is double and triple and quadruple down on your base, whereas the Democrats have a well-oiled machine that's more targeted towards swing voters, maybe you eke it out. At the very least, you don't give up and say that it's all over until at the very last second.
So Joe Biden was on with Lester Holt doing an interview yesterday, I guess, so that's Monday. One of the things he was asked about was whether this rhetoric, and apparently Joe Biden had said, I think it was on a donor call, something about Donald Trump being in we got to put Donald Trump in the bullseye. Lester Holt asked him about that. Let's go to the clip, and I'd love to get your response on the other end.
Well, let's talk about the conversation this has started, and it's really about language, what we say out loud and the consequences of those. You called your opponent an existential threat on a call a week ago. You said it's time to put Trump in the bullseye. There's some dispute about the context, but I think you appreciate that.
I didn't say crosshairs. I was talking about focus on. Look, the truth of the matter was, what I guess I was talking about at the time was, there was very little focus on Trump's agenda.
Yeah, the term is bullseye.
It was a mistake to use the word. I didn't say crosshairs. I meant bullseye. I meant focus on him. Focus on what he's doing. Focus on his policies. Focus on the number of lies he told in the debate. Focus. There's a whole range of things that, look, I'm not the guy that said I want to be a dictator on day one. I'm not the guy that refused to accept the outcome of the election. I'm not the guy who said that one accept the outcome of this election automatically. You can't only love your country when you win. And so the focus was on what he's saying, and the idea.
But have you taken a step back and done a little soul searching on things that you may have said that could incite people who are not balanced?
Well, I don't think, look, how do you talk about the threat to democracy, which is real, when a president says things like he says? Do you just not say anything because it may incite somebody? Look, I have not engaged in that rhetoric. Now, my opponent is engaged in that rhetoric. He talks about there'll be a bloodbath if he loses, talking about how he's going to forgive all those, actually, I guess, suspend the sentences of all those who were arrested and sentenced to go to jail because of what happened in the Capitol. I'm not out there making fun of, remember the picture of Donald Trump when Nancy Pelosi's husband was hit with a hammer, joking about it?
The basic substance of the answer is fine. The presentation is, there wasn't so much of a gaffe, although I wouldn't even apologize for the bullseye remark if I was him. I think you could totally put that in proper context. And there's parts where it just sounds a little contradictory when he's kind of stumbling around, and it's just the whole thing's very, very labored. It's very disjointed. It's not full blown dementia. Obviously the basic substance of what he's saying you can understand, but it's not crisp. It's halting. It's more defensive than it needs to be. Mm-hmm. It goes in certain directions which are not wholly digressions, but not quite on the mark. Like the dictator at day one stuff, like isn't the point. Like you could have much more easily done a whole rap sheet of straight up calls to violence from Donald Trump. So I'm going to pay your legal costs if you beat up this heckler at my rally. Encouraging on social media when a Trump supporter tried to run a Biden, I believe it was a bus, off the road, as well as pardoning outright insurrectionists. So there's lots of things you could say that Trump is. Trump was directly, if you want to stop short of the word incitement, at minimum, whipping up a crowd of soon-to-be insurrectionists into a frenzy on January 6th. Like, there's lots of things you can really pinpoint to which are not stretches. You could do that first and say, I said, let's put Trump in a bullseye on a donor phone call in the clear context of making sure we focus on his record. There is no comparison between the two things, and zero evidence that this shooter even knew I said this comment, let alone would have been incited by it. But you need a candidate who is has the capacity to execute that kind of message and retort. And even if you don't think Biden is actively displaying a neurological disease right now, he's just not doing that.
Okay.
And so it's just a huge missed opportunity.
This is what I've been saying for a year now, or 2 years. Because the Biden we just saw with Lester Holt was not the Biden of the debate. The debate Biden was really, really bad.
Yeah.
What we just saw was a guy who wasn't horrible, but was not able to score any points. He couldn't go on offense. And if he's down in the scoreboard, he doesn't have the rhetorical ability to overcome it and to come back and to score points. That's what I've been saying for over a year now. And so I think that this is what we saw with Lester Holt. Biden has been in that state for a long time.
2008 Joe Biden, I remember because 2007, filleted Rudy Giuliani in a sentence.
I mean, think about it. Rudy Giuliani, there's only three things he mentioned in a sentence: a noun and a verb and 9/11. I mean, there's nothing else. There's nothing else. And I mean it sincerely.
And it completely transformed the nation's perception of Rudy Giuliani. So he once had these skills. And so it is saddening to watch him struggle to make basic points. So even when he's on, I mean this isn't quite his current A game. You could say the NATO press conference was better than the Lester Holt interview. I mean, there's a varying quality to his performances on a day-to-day basis. And I wrote about this, I guess after we talked, I can't remember if I brought up at all in the last show. The Woodrow Wilson comparison, I wrote about this on Friday. And I really, I've written some pieces lately that have kind of caught on a bit, and the Wilson one was not one of them. But
it should.
For those of you who are hardcore DMZ fans, I do urge you to read my Woodrow Wilson piece. And honestly, Matt, I've been obsessed with Woodrow Wilson for a long time. I learned stuff in the course of writing this piece that I didn't know going in, and I find myself in this situation a lot. I think I know it. I think I know it. I've read the books. I feel like I pretty much know it, and then I dig in a little deeper and I find it even more.
Yep. It's one of the great things about the job.
Yeah.
By the way, you're always learning.
So there was a project to collect the papers of Woodrow Wilson by a man named Arthur Link. It literally took almost his entire adult career to do it. It's 69 volumes. I mean, he literally worked on it for decades. And in the course of putting the papers together, there'd be additional commentary with the papers. And so in volume 58, he consulted with several neurologists and medical historians about the nature of Woodrow Wilson's neurological disease. As you may know, he had a huge stroke in October of 1919, was never fully recovered from it, was incapacitated for a time. You can argue that his wife was effectively present during this time. The most overt thing she did was that she assigned a veto message, probably without consulting Wilson directly. But you see in the medical historian accounts that Wilson was displaying signs of early dementia and suffered mini strokes in the run-up to the full-blown stroke that were not properly diagnosed along the way. And as one historian said, you wouldn't necessarily assume dementia based on what you saw in real time, but you can look back and connect the dots. For example, in 1918, he couldn't recall the details of a meeting and told one of his closest aides that his mind was leaky. It's a quote, leaky. And look, you might just say, well, we all get a little absent-minded sometimes. You wouldn't necessarily assume that means, dementia. And like in and of itself is not a definitive data point. But again, you can look at it in retrospect and piece things together. In April of 1919, now he went on a 7-month trip to Paris at the end of World War I to literally negotiate himself the Treaty of Versailles and establishing the League of Nations. He didn't delegate it to the Secretary of State. He did it. There's a small break in there where he sailed back to America for a few weeks and then sailed back. He had to sign some bills, do a couple speeches, and go back. So it's a very, very intense time. Huge workload that he's putting on. And he was also managing the reconstruction of Europe at the same time during all this, although Herbert Hoover was the point man on that. He gets a fever in April of 1919. 103 fever, experienced some delirium during that time. Delirium is not the same thing as dementia. But there is anecdotal evidence that he wasn't the same man after that point. Herbert Hoover said that his mind was not as sharp after the illness. And the medical historians say that in his particular case, so he basically has long-standing cerebrovascular disease. He was having mini strokes in his 30s. And the temporary delirium forces the brain to kind of go into overload, to kind of pump oxygen into the brain, and overworks those arteries, and can exacerbate an existing neurological condition. So he apparently has a mini stroke a few weeks after the fever, and the fever might have been. You might recall some articles saying he had Spanish flu. We don't know if he had Spanish flu. It's possible, but it's not definitive. But he had something. He clearly had something. So he comes back to America after that, and he's giving speeches. He's talking to senators, trying to sell them on the treaty, and they're not as strong speeches as they used to be. He is getting obstinate and rigid. His political judgment isn't the same as it was. There's potential for compromise on the treaty. He won't hear of it. And then he goes on. So he wasn't running for re-election at that point, though there's no term limits. But he goes on a month-long speaking tour out west, 8,000 miles, 29 cities. He's not getting anywhere with the Senate. He thinks he's going to rally the public behind this. His doctors with close aides said, you don't have the health for this. He clearly was not in good shape. They know exactly what was going on. And Wilson seems to know this. And he's like, I can't be anybody else. I got to do it. It's got to be me. And even on the trip, some speeches are really good. One of the historians said some of the best of his life, but some of them were quite bad, and signs of a declining cognitive ability. And then in the course of the trip, he has the full-blown stroke, and they have to cut the trip short and rush back to the White House, where he, after a few days of improvement, actually falls unconscious and is bedridden for a time. After that, although they're not fully transparent with the public about what's going on. So you read that chronology. Again, I don't know exactly what Joe Biden has, but when you read that chronology, it becomes a little stark that, you know what, a good NATO press conference doesn't tell me that he's out of the woods, because you can have a bad day after that. Yeah. And it's not going to be a straight line downward. It's going to be jagged when you have some kind of neurological condition. At the very minimum, you'd want a doctor to check you out. And not necessarily your White House doctor, because like with Wilson, White House doctors can get a little too close to you and not give you as candid an assessment as you want. So I mean, if an independent medical assessment came out and said, Bill Scher, Wilson's got nothing to do with this, and he's actually in good shape, and this is just sort of normal aging, then we'd have to accept that. But just for his own health, you'd want a doctor to check you out and say, hey, what's going on here? Because this doesn't look good to the naked eye.
I think, getting us back to the modern political world, here's just simply my take is this, Phil. If Joe Biden were up by 5 points, by 3 points even, I think he could run a sort of prevent defense where he could do just well enough. He could sort of stave off attacks. Like I think he has the capacity to do okay, to survive. Maybe not in a debate actually, but day in and day out in interviews and things like that, he can break even. Like on a good day, Biden can break even. What he cannot do is use the awesome power of words to make up, to close the gap. He is down. He does not have the capacity to score points using the power of rhetoric. And what else do you have as president? And so that for that reason alone, Democrats, he should go. I mean, we're putting aside the governing issue. I'm just talking pure politics here. He does. Best case scenario is a draw in terms of like any scenario that involves him using words. At best, he can avoid catastrophe and survive. What he cannot do is hit a home run. That's not happening.
And allow me just to put a fine point on what I just said before, because look, I don't know the exact nature of Biden's condition. I'm not a doctor, can't diagnose, so I can't diagnose from afar. Just to take Biden and his doctor at face value, he had an assessment at the start of the year. Apparently, I think the actual examination was in January, but they put out the memo in February saying he was all clear. Let's just take that as true. Something could have happened since. By their own narrative, he had a bad cold in June. And I mentioned this before. Like you can look at Biden's Howard Stern interview in April, where he looks better. He gave an interview in CNN in May, where voice is raspier, but still, I think, generally more coherent than what we've seen as of late. And then in June, first week of June, he goes to Paris for the Normandy trip. He comes home, and there's some reports that some of the world leaders in France were like, this guy looking so hot. That same week is also the Hunter Biden trial. So another level of stress being put on there. June 10th, he's back. He does that Juneteenth event where he looks a little slack-jawed and is acting a little frozen while everyone's dancing around him. We've seen some anecdotal reports since that people thought up close they didn't look so great. He goes to Italy after that. I think it's after Italy, he does the California event. Forgive me if I'm getting that reversed. But we know anecdotally, some of the people at the California event didn't think he looked good. Comes back from there for the debate prep, has this big cold. So again, I don't know exactly what's going on there in terms of his health in that period, but it's all very different than what we were seeing in April and May. And there could be lingering after effects from that. So just to get back to your point, I don't feel like I was necessarily snowed before June about how good he was. The Joe Biden from April might have been able to, if not a home run, maybe get some doubles, out there. Might have seemed a little more. I mean, again, he did the ad-libbing at the State of the Union address 2 years in a row to good effect. But now you got to wonder: did something happen recently that makes it harder for him to pull that kind of thing off and warrants a fresh medical assessment?
Okay, you tell us. Sound off in the comments. Has Biden changed recently in the last 3 or 4 months, or is what we saw with Lester Holt what we've seen for the last couple of years? We'd love to hear from you in the comments. Bill, anything you want to plug?
Well, you can check out the Wilson piece at the Washington Monthly, and also the more recent, Get a Grip Democrats piece, where even as bad as it might be, you can't throw in the towel. You can't know. I didn't say this in the piece. Dead people win office sometimes. Weird things happen.
Mel Carnahan, right?
What's that?
Was it Mel Carnahan?
Mel Carnahan, that's right.
Yeah.
So you gotta stick with it and believe that there's an opening, because there might be an opening even in the worst case scenario. So that's what I got to plug.
All right. Good show. We'll be back here in the DMZ hopefully next week, Bill.
All right. Take care.
All right.
Matt.
Yes.
I am out next week.
Oh, you're out next week?
Yes.
Okay. Then we'll see you back here in the DMZ in 2 and 2. As Chuck Woolery might say. See you, Bill.
Take care.